He's a living Savior. Live and act as though he's dead. He's not dead.
From the Racks and Stacks and the Best in Wax, it's Cody and Tommy. What's going on, buddy?
I'm not even really sure what you just said. What's up, man?
I've been practicing that all day.
That's been going on. Well, cool. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man.
Cool.
What you guys don't know is I haven't really had a voice for seems like a month.
Yeah, we've had to put off the podcast for like 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have a voice. And if you did, it was like a prepubescent boy. It was so funny.
Every time I talked loud, my voice would clip. It would not go above a certain decibel. And I'm like, bro, we can't record.
It's going to have to get your money's worth with the editing.
Yeah, I thought about doing like an AI Tommy.
There you still throwing it. We even if we get to this point, I said we're going to have to do a solo episode and be like, Tommy's on vacation.
Well, I'm afraid it would replace me, and I'm like, well, I guess it's just Cody.
I'm not replacing you. This is the Appalachian Disciples. It's plural.
Well, and then I also thought, I'm like, man, what, Cody? What if we record and you just talked all the time? I just go, yeah. just every once in a while. Just agree the whole time.
Sounds great. Man, I like to monitor the numbers when it comes to our podcast. Not because I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's growing because of something I did. I just like to see where the message is going. Right. And I've been so excited. You and I have been talking about it this past week. We are now in over 30 countries, 34 to be exact. We've gone over 2,000 downloads, approaching 2,500 quickly. Man, the podcast is growing, and I know you know this because I've told you, but we were both kind of surprised. Of course, the United States is number one as far as downloads for our podcast, but Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam!
That was shocking to me. What's up, our friends in Vietnam?
Right. To be honest, I'm floored. That was probably not on my radar for who was going to be number two, but they're overwhelmingly in second. So if we ever are traveling, Vietnam's on the list.
And I will tell you, amazing food.
Oh, yeah, I've had Vietnamese food. It is good.
It is really good.
It is good.
One of my favorite places to eat when we went back to California in October was a Vietnamese place, and we went there. Oh, so good.
Yeah. There's probably none really local that I can think of.
In Beckley?
Not Beckley. When I say local, I'll drive for a rest, like somewhere in West Virginia or in the Appalachian region.
I'm pretty sure we'll have to go to Charlotte.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Or maybe Columbus.
You never know.
I'm going to look up in Ohio this weekend, see if I find it. So.
You never know.
But, man, it's just so cool to see how God has blessed the podcast and how he's moving the message and stuff, because we are talking about, I feel like, some very practical topics in Christianity and some things that I feel like a lot of Christians do struggle with that we just don't talk about very often. You're probably not going to find it maybe in a Sunday morning sermon, and just those that want to dive deeper, and we really appreciate everybody's support in getting that message out. So the other countries, if you want a shout out, share it with your friends.
We're waiting for you, Antarctica. When are you going to represent?
Yeah.
To all the scientists down there.
Penguins don't speak Appalachian.
They can.
Well, that's news to me.
Yeah.
So
it's the world's coldest holler.
Yeah, there you go. But man, there's a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And it was something that I struggled with a lot early in my walk with Christian when I was trying to learn it for myself, in younger adulthood, college age type of thing. I was really struggling about the evidence for Christ, right?
Yeah.
And, the Bible tells us very clearly that we should walk with childlike faith, right? Which is great and amazing. And I absolutely buy into that because there's a lot of things that we just can't look to and prove and all these other things. But nobody had ever presented to me the overwhelming evidence, first, that there is a God, who Jesus is, the fact of creation, and how complex it is. There's so many things that point to a creator and a loving creator that I was never presented, right? And there is so much information on this, podcasts, books, and the presentations, and even like movies and stuff. There's so much overwhelming evidence that was never presented to me. and faith of a mustard seed. And you keep hearing that. And I'm not saying throw out faith by any stretch, because that's what our whole religion and relationship with Christ is built on, is faith. But man, there's just so much evidence.
You're talking about this apologetics and stuff.
Right, right. Basically, apologetics. And so I did a deep dive because if you guys will remember from my my testimony episode, episode 2, I talked a lot about how there was a guy, his name's Frank Turek, who Tommy and I both absolutely love this dude. He's just so intelligent. And he came to WVU when I was in college and presented this idea of evidence for Christ and how it took. He has a whole podcast, and his company's called Cross Examine, but he has a podcast and a presentation, everything called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Basically, in this presentation, he presents to you that it takes more faith for you to be an atheist than what it does just to believe in an all-knowing, loving, timeless, immaterial creator that all of creation and all evidence we have points to. And that was just so literally mind-blowing for me as a early Christian. So I wanted you and I mean, we could go months talking about this and make a year or 2 or 3 of podcast episodes on this topic. But I feel like we need to give our listeners just a 1 hour here synopsis of kind of the things that we have found.
Yeah.
Because this has been, correct me if I'm wrong, this has been kind of a newer concept for you too, right? Like,
I mean, I've been like, I don't know, I would say like, I'm trying to remember what year it was, maybe 2013, around there maybe. I was slowly getting into apologetics with Lee Strobel and stuff like that. And that was basically just, he was an atheist who went, over to the Holy Land to disprove everything, and it ended up finding out like, no, there's more stuff that's legit.
Yeah, it points all to him.
and he's written A Case for Christ, then A Case for Creator. I've Case for Creator, I'm just going to warn you, it's going to hurt your head. There's a lot of science jargon and stuff like that, and my head hurts with it. So I can only do like a few pages at a time. But The Case for Christ is kind of what we're going with today, where it's like the human, Messiah here on earth, and how he was witnessed. People actually saw him, and stuff like that. And it's an excellent read. I have a couple different versions. I have like a student version and the actual adult version, that's a little bit more, smarty pants for people like you, Cody.
No, that would not be me. That's one thing I'm not. You and I both know I'm not a big reader, and you and I both just started that new book on the last book that Charlie Kirk wrote, just about the Sabbath, right? Yeah. And we're not getting political or anything on the podcast, but I just admired the guy for his wisdom and how much he wanted to learn about God's heart and the gifts and things that God had. So we do a weekly chapter read, and we go back and forth, and that's the book that we just kind of landed on. But we also just finished a book.
Yeah, the Book of Martyrs by John Fox.
Yeah,
and apparently this book's been around for ages.
Yeah.
But they keep adding to it, and the book ironically ends our version that we read in 2001.
Right,
and we all know what happened in 2001. 9/11.
Yeah,
and it's not a, how would I say it? It's not a great read because it's depressing.
A hard read. It is. It's a lot of old English because you can tell this book was written a long time ago. But it is a very cool book. I think probably the coolest thing about this book was I realized how much the American church especially has no clue what persecution is. The fact that during COVID we're like, oh, this is real persecution, and we had to sit in our homes for a year and do church on TV. Yes, that was hard. It was nothing compared to what the church has faced in other countries and around the world. So it just gave me a totally new perspective. I even texted our pastor and I was like, man, we have no idea what persecution is.
Not only that, I mean, I think it's important that, we do stuff outside, like read books like that, so we know that, but also mission trips, because we don't know how easy we have it here until we go and help serve someone in another country. It's very easy to serve someone downtown Beckley on a food truck, because this is my community. But when you see go to like another country, and you realize that those people that I serve downtown Beckley, they are rich compared to these other people. And so I love the perspective of bringing it down, like we talked about a few podcasts ago, slowing it down a little bit and just bringing us back down to, basics, I guess. Oh, who was it? Francis Chan? Is he the one that gave away like all of his money?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you see his house. I mean, it's a nice house, but it's like, you think this guy would have a mansion, but
right.
no, it's like, man, I admire that. You're bringing it back down to base level.
Right.
And, like the childlike faith, you're just, we're going to start here.
Right. And, I think that one of when you and I were planning out these episodes, it was really hard to say which one do we want to do first, which one do we want to do second, because this is going to be a multiple part series. We may or may not do it back to back. We'll just kind of see where the Lord leads us. And, this stuff kind of takes a lot of studying to do too. So we'll just see where time takes us. But this is going to be part one in a series. Again, it might be back to back. It might be broken up. But I think that today we are going to focus in on the aspect of the historical figure of Jesus. So the evidence for Jesus as a man, and then what he said about who he was, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to kind of follow along with us in this series as we go through, because just proving Jesus was a man doesn't necessarily prove that he was God, right? And of course, we believe that Jesus is God, and we're going to have to lay this out over multiple. This is not something we could cover in an hour by any stretch.
Right.
So a lot of this, I want to preface that too, that this is going to be kind of broken down into easier digestible parts, but there's so many rabbit holes that you can dive down with this that'll help to strengthen the points that we're going to bring about today. So starting out, one thing that I did not know when I first started researching this is that Jesus, even in so many documents outside of the Bible, is the most documented figure in ancient history. There are so many documents, or one of, not the most, but one of the most documented figures in ancient history, across so many different manuscripts and so many different religions. Jesus is mentioned. Outside of what people do differ on is who Jesus was, not that there was Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, this is the easiest episode of the series to talk about, just because this is not even controversial.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we have people and even authority figures that would deny Jesus as a person is insane. That would honestly be like saying George Washington never existed.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so much evidence that he at least was a person that it's completely undeniable.
Yeah, it's crazy because even during that time, the people that didn't like him would still recognize he existed, and then even after his resurrection, the first people that recognized him were women. Or that, it's like that wasn't a common thing.
Yeah, you didn't do that. There's so many things in the Bible that would be seen as absolutely weird in those types of ancient texts that you just would not do.
It wasn't culturally normal.
Right. I think that one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from one of our senior pastors, and she said that the Bible is God's story. We need to stop inserting ourselves in it.
Yeah.
Right. So when we read this and we're like, the women were the first ones to see him, that's not something we could skip over. You have to dive into that. Why was that significant? And I would have never thought to have done that. I would have been like, okay, so what? It's women.
Yeah.
And in today's day and age, that would not be controversial. But then it was extremely controversial. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, and even like I remember Frank Turek said, how was this question presented to him? Name any other Christian reference or something like that in the Bible to prove that Jesus exists. And he goes, none of them were Christians. That wasn't a thing. They were Jews. You know? And he's like, why would they do that?
Right.
But it's like me sitting here saying like someone I don't like, well, he does exist.
Yeah.
I'm like, so, I mean, I could have very easily said that person doesn't exist.
Right.
But they didn't. They're telling the truth. And like even the Roman soldier that, put the spear in Jesus' side, he basically in a very Americanized way, basically was like, what have I done? Like,
yeah.
If you really think about that, like they recognized him as the Messiah, but he was a living person. There's documented proof that he did exist.
Right.
But like you said, he existed. Now, was he the Messiah?
Right. Then who was he? That is the other question. And I think there's so much overwhelming evidence for that too. That's probably going to end up being our part 2 in the series. But even when you look at Scripture, like in the beginning of Luke, I don't need to read through it. You guys can look at it for yourselves. But Luke even documents things differently in his gospel than what others did. His is a very like historic kind of ordered type of account. Like right from the very beginning, you can look at it and be like, this reads a little bit differently, especially when it starts out. So I encourage our listeners to go through and just kind of look at that. But I think when you start talking to somebody who is a non-believer, or somebody who's at least agnostic about the idea of Jesus and is starting to look for it, because one of my favorite lines, we've brought up Frank Turk a couple times, that he always says in his presentations is, if the Bible is true, if the story about Jesus is true, would you become a believer?
Yes.
And he asks them and they say yes or no. If they say no, then honestly, there's no point, because if something is true and you're not willing to believe it, that's on you.
Well, and he also said, if Genesis 1:1 is true, then you really got to hold a lot of weight to the rest of the Bible as well.
Right. If Genesis 1:1 is possible, everything else is fair game. Everything. This kind of stuff blew my mind because I went so long not knowing anything about this stuff. So I think it's important too, again, with if you're approached by a non-believer or even somebody who's just kind of looking for truth, that they're going to be extremely skeptical when you look or when you start only quoting Scripture or the Bible for evidence about something, right? Which for a Christian, for a believer, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
But if somebody doesn't believe in the Bible, that's an issue.
It is tough.
You see what I mean? If they're just looking at it as a 2,000-year-old work of fiction, then you're not doing anything for them, right?
To me, I have a buddy who really believes in UFOs. Yeah, I believe in the objects that flying. I believe that they are unidentified, but I don't believe in actual aliens.
Right.
And so if he's like trying to explain all this stuff to me about aliens, I'm like, sure, bro. Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, I can kind of understand where they would come from that point.
Right. And it just makes sense. If you try to look at it from a non-believer standpoint, if they don't believe the book that you're telling them for, like, okay, that's great, but you might as well be reading fairy tales to me. They're not going to get anything. So some things that I really want to mention about the historical point of Jesus. And again, our listeners, as we name some of these things, as long as you're not like driving or anything, write some of this stuff down, and I'd encourage you to go and look at it for yourselves to kind of spot check us too. But there's so many different historians and historical figures who have been documented about talking about Jesus, especially from the Roman, the Jewish, Greek side of things, which would have all been appropriate around the time of Jesus and stuff. But he's mentioned by lots of non-Christian historians.
Yeah.
And again, they're not even really quoting him as much as God or as the Messiah. They're quoting him more of a historical figure. Tacitus is one of them. He is a Roman historian. He talks about how Jesus was executed underneath Pilate. Josephus, he's a Jewish historian. He mentions Jesus as a teacher and a crucified leader, which carries with the Jewish faith because that's pretty much what they think anyway, right? Pliny the Younger, that was a new one for me. I had never heard about that one until I was doing research, but he was a Roman governor. He talks about how Christians are worshiping Christ as God, mentioning him that way. Lucian of Samosata, and that's Samosata.
I read that as samosa, and those are so good. Sorry, I kept reading that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so hungry.
He is from Greek origins, and he talks about, he mocks Christians for worshiping somebody who was crucified, or a crucified man as Jesus as being a crucified man. So there's so many things that point to Jesus, and this is very important because these sources have no obligation to promote Christianity like the Bible does. Right? It has absolutely no reason to talk about Jesus, to point to Jesus, but yet they still do. And they confirm, and this is just a couple. I mean, there are literally thousands of documents and records about this. But they confirm that Jesus lived, that Jesus was a person, that he was crucified, and he was worshiped early on. Okay? Those are some extremely important things. That still does not show us that Jesus is God, or Jesus was the Son of God, that he was the Messiah. Check all the boxes, right? It doesn't point to that yet. But it does let us know that people that have nothing to do with biblical writings are saying this man, Jesus, lived. Now, what they say about him afterward, that's not the point we're trying to make. But it's very important that he is in documents outside of it. I mean, the man is the man. He is the man.
The man.
He is by far the most influential figure in history. And it's not even close. So if it's worth talking about the historical evidence for Jesus when somebody's not even doubting or is trying to doubt that he even lived at all, that he was made up.
Right.
Because there's a lot of little g gods, right, in other religions that are not real. They talk about them as if they were, and they were not real people. They were not real gods. They were nothing. So.
But what's funny is other religions talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
But you never hear, our Bible talk about other gods. I mean, you hear them little g gods like idols and stuff, but you never hear them say talk about the Indian god or, I'm not sure what god that is to them, but
Right. And I think what's extremely important here is that even the enemies and the skeptics of Jesus and who he was confirm he existed. Like, it is literally not even controversial anymore to understand that Jesus was at least a man.
Yeah.
He lived and walked this earth. That is not controversial at all. If anybody tries to tell you, I'm sorry, at this point, they're just completely uneducated. There is no other way to put that.
What always surprises me, and this is something that I didn't know, was how short his ministry was.
Yeah, it wasn't long at all.
To me, I'm like thinking,
right.
Oh man, like growing up, I see this, funny, he's a white guy, and every time I see him, but he more than likely wasn't white.
Right.
But
Olive skinned.
But he, I'm like, man, this guy had to have been at least 60 or 105 or however old Moses was. It was like 33.
Yeah.
And his ministry was like 3 years.
Yeah, it wasn't very long.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, then I take a step back and I'm like, man, his ministry was 3 years and look at the impact.
Yeah.
I'm like, and then I look at I've been on the food truck for 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to step up my game.
It's pretty crazy too, because even if you look at the ground that Jesus covered, wasn't that, I mean, it was more than I want to walk, but it wasn't that much coverage, right? And, historians will argue that, the whole 3 year thing between 3, 5, 6, give or take a couple of years on either side, regardless, it was very short than what we think. But when you actually think about the ministry of Jesus too, it was his whole life, because there's so much. We just did the Christmas episode a few months ago. There's so much story that his ministry started, technically, in my mind anyway, from day one. Right? At the person of Jesus, right? And then we have so much time there that we really don't know what was going on.
I wish we did.
I wish we did too.
I'm kind of curious.
I hope one day that we do find, hopefully, something that's, can make it and be.
I bet you he was amazing at dodgeball.
Yeah. That's why I just stopped it.
Yeah, he's like that.
That would be wild. But, so some other things that help us along the way here is the idea of the Gospels, okay?
Yeah.
Because now that we've looked at non-biblical things, I think it is fair to look at the Bible, right? Because the Bible is one of the most scrutinized, I guess would be the right word.
Controversial.
Yeah, books of all time. And the thing about it is has withstood the test of time very well. It is unchanged, and I'm not talking about different versions or whatever, but anytime somebody has ever set out to disprove, they prove. It just is the way that it is. So one very important thing that I did not know is that the Gospels were written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses who walked with Jesus. Okay, a lot of people think like the Gospels were written firsthand by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's not true. They were written by people who were with them, right? So they were written within that lifetime of Jesus. So this would be like your daughter or your son writing it with you, right? Which is really wild to think that it's written in year 60 to 90 AD. If you witnessed this man who was going around and healing blind people, raising people from the dead, and was brutally mocked, and everybody thought that he was the Messiah, marching in through Jerusalem, was crucified just a handful of days later. All he says, 60 years later, you think you're not going to remember that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can still, I'm not 60 years old, but I would imagine that when I'm 60 years old, I'm not going to forget like my wedding day.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to be a pretty vivid memory.
If the old dementia kicks in, you never know.
We're making the point, Tom.
Okay, but I'm just saying.
Dementia is because of chemicals in our food, and they didn't have it then. Anyway, like this guy was so close with these 12 disciples that they're absolutely going to remember this later in life. Like they're one of their best, even if he wasn't, people don't want to believe that he was God. He was still like their best friend, their rabbi, their teacher, at the very minimum of it. He was their Lord, and most of them, minus one, understood that. But they're going to remember him being beaten, mocked, crucified. Like all of that is going to be a very vivid memory.
Yeah.
So to me, the fact, even if most of it was not written by the eyewitness, it was written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, which is extremely accurate.
Yeah.
To me, that it's the same thing.
Like right now, my daughter got me a book, and by all means, I'm not 60 years old, but it's a book that I could write. It has like these question prompts about my family, and I just write them down, the answers. So, give my daughter something to reflect back on my family. And some of the questions, I'm like, man, I have a really hard time remembering some of these things. But then there are things where I'm like, the ones that are come easily to me are these, questions. And it's always a very important memory, like I remember when my dad almost burned down our house, and I remember all these certain things because it was I guess you would say a life-changing moment. And then you mentioned teachers. I still remember my favorite teacher in high school. I remember exactly what it looks like.
Absolutely.
Special guy to me, and I'm like, man, like those are those moments, and I will always remember that. Then there's things like the other day I was trying to find some old books, and I found my yearbook. And I'm like, I'm going to flip through this thing. And this yearbook's from 1999. And I flip through, I'm like, I totally forgot about that person. And then all of a sudden something will get triggered on that person. I'm like, oh, I remember. Yeah, okay. And this thing start coming back, and it's like all legit,
right.
But, these eyewitnesses, though, going back to like even just like the crucifixion and stuff, it's like I was thinking about this today when I was thinking about this episode. I'm like, man, if I could go back in time, if there was like a genie in a lamp and it said go back to any time, some people would say, oh, I want to go visit, when the earth was created and then all this stuff. I'm like, man, for me, there's that what was it, the Passover week before the execution, before that, I would have loved to seen that, like, how everyone was like happy, like that.
Yeah. Everybody was
like
welcoming
the palm branches, like all that stuff. I would have loved to seen that. Because I think that, that right there is something someone will remember, because you have two completely different drastic, situations. You have rejoicing, then you have pain and death. And then there's trauma.
Practically immediately.
And there's trauma. You're going to remember a traumatic experience. Some people remember their first car accident.
Yeah.
But like it's crazy how this stuff is like in that time, and hearing it firsthand, it just almost transports you there.
Yeah, and what's really cool about the Gospels, a lot of people will say, well, there's contradictions in the Gospel, right? And they're not necessarily contradictions. When you really look into them, there's absolutely explanations for everything that is there. But it being written slightly a different way, this would be like if you and I were to witness the same car wreck, right? You go write down your story about it. I'm going to write down my story. You might say the car was red. I might say the car was white or something like that. Well, maybe that wouldn't be that obvious, but you get what I'm saying? Like, it might be a minor detail. Yeah, like if the car reared off to the left and you're like, oh, no, the car reared off to the right. Like these smaller details, it doesn't matter. There was still the car wreck. Right? And that's kind of where a lot of these Gospels you would look for that. You wouldn't look for them to line up to each other because you don't want, the writer of Luke and the writer of Matthew, like writing it down word for word off of another, that you want a different, point of view. That's the whole point of the Gospels, is to show practically the exact same timeline, but in a different point of view, which is really cool because the Gospels are written in totally different ways. Like I mentioned earlier, Luke is more like a historical. There's a lot more factual stuff in Luke. You get a lot more of the emotional and feeling type stuff in some of the other Gospels. So
I think it's important that it's written like that because it almost makes it to where like, hey, no, this really happened. Here's more proof. Like the more witnesses you get and everything lines up, it's almost like you're verifying it.
Right.
You get a little blue check mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are thousands of manuscripts that we can go through that will show consistency and preservation of the Gospels as well. You can go back and look at like the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the earliest manuscripts that we have have translated and it shows the Bible. You haven't got to do it yet, and we've planned on doing this, but the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. is amazing. They actually have pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls there. It is unreal to see the history and how old these documents are and how they have withstood the test of time. Another cool thing about this is the fact that there's so many archaeological finds. We don't have a lot of time to dive into that, but there are tons that confirm the people, the places, the customs that are talked about in the Gospels. Again, each and every time that an archaeologist or somebody tries to go over into the Holy Land and tries to disprove something or find something, they find more evidence to show that everything that's written about is true. The Pool of Bethesda, they found it. I mean, there's so many big things. Did you see the thing where they released they may have found the house where they lowered?
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting ready to say?
That was Josh Howerton. That if you want to go down a rabbit hole of archaeology and findings and stuff, Frank Turek has this guy on all the time. His name is Dr. Titus Kennedy, and he's a field archaeologist. And he actually is, I believe, the guy when Frank Turek does the tours over there, the Holy Land tours, and he's the one leading it. And he takes you right to the places. And man, you go down a rabbit hole. And I think I mentioned a few podcasts ago where I'll be reading in the morning before work, and all of a sudden I'm like, I wonder if the gorge of what the gorge of Argonne looks like. And I'm like, in my mind, I think of the New River Gorge.
Yeah.
And then I Google it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a real place, and it looks nothing like that. It's like a walled cave, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
It's pretty cool I love putting pictures with the words, just like what you were saying, man. That is so powerful to do that. Even the other day when I was reading in my CSB, I actually had a Bob group that I had to attend by myself.
Wow, a little jab there. I feel that.
just had to fit it in.
There was
somewhere.
Good food there, I heard.
There was good. But, we talked about it was the distance that Abraham and Isaac had to walk to get to the mountain where he was going to sacrifice him and stuff. And so wild to know. To me, every time I've ever heard that story, I'm like, he just got out of his tent. I was going to say house, but tent, and looked over. There was the mountain, right? Like they were part beside. It's a very long distance that they had to walk. It took about 3 days for them to walk that distance. And the whole time, Isaac's carrying the wood that he was going to be sacrificed on. And it's just mind blowing to me because we skip over these details that really bring the story to life that I've always had that just completely skipped over. And I'm like, wow, that was amazing.
Which even in that detail right there, I mean, we're talking about details. Isaac carrying the wood, right? Which means one thing. He wasn't a baby.
Right.
I'm like, okay, so he knew what was going on. He's fully aware.
Right. I didn't know that either. In my mind, he's a 5-year-old kid,
Asking, where's the sacrifice? We usually have a lamb. I'm like, you're the lamb.
Yeah.
And then, the ram caught in the thicket or whatever. I'm sitting there. I'm like, well, that's symbolism of, like a crown of thorns. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is poetic.
But what's even crazier about that story that we've been studying about is that it was God promised a lamb, but he didn't bring the lamb. Then he brought a ram. Yeah. And later it was pointing to the lamb that he was bringing was Christ, which is just so cool.
Didn't they also walk to the altar and he said something like, I'll be back?
Yes.
And he came back.
Uh-huh.
Like man, I would have, if that was my kid, I'd say I couldn't do that.
So many cool things.
I'd be like, hey, we're going to make a run for it.
We're totally getting out of here. But, there's just so many things like that are in scriptures that we do tend to skip over. Some really wild details that you can look at tons of other ancient manuscripts, and you're not going to find these types of things. First would be embarrassing details. Okay, throughout the Gospels, especially, you see things like Peter denying Jesus. You wouldn't want that there. Disciples misunderstanding Jesus over and over and over, them constantly falling asleep on him in his darkest hour.
And he has to talk to him in parables because they don't understand.
Right. You talked about it earlier where women were discovering the empty tomb. That would have never happened. That even if it was women, they would have never documented it that way unless it was true. And then the whole idea of his crucifixion, that was very shameful to die that way in Roman culture. So they wouldn't have documented it that way either. If they wanted to really boost it up and not tell the truth about it, Jesus wouldn't, this is not the way the story would have gone down.
Right.
Even when you look at it in that aspect, of what you would compare in other types of literature, this story of Jesus has so many little details that actually point a beautiful picture about how true the story really is.
Yeah. And then, like you basically said, like every movie I watch usually paints the hero as being some amazing person, but the Gospels don't. It's like, man, like if you watch Passion of the Christ or you hear about a story, you think, oh man, he's weak, but you're like, no, he's not.
Right.
And it even though Jesus was perfect, which is the funny thing,
right?
Because it doesn't paint him as perfect, but you find out later,
right,
he was.
Right. And the thing about it is, too, that makes Christianity just so beautiful, and we don't have time to get into this point, is if the story stopped there, nothing else really mattered.
Yeah.
Like, if the resurrection didn't happen, then Christianity, what is the point? Jesus was a good man. He was a good teacher.
Yeah.
But the fact that he raised from the dead, he conquered death, hell, and the grave, that is what makes Christianity. That's the faith aspect of it. However, there's overwhelming evidence for that as well. We don't have time to get into it.
There's so much about, and like we said, there's books upon books. Like if you want, some people will, fall asleep to this stuff because it is very. I love this stuff.
Me too, because again, it was never presented to me. This idea of there is actual facts. There is so much evidence for who God is, who Jesus is. There's so much, and gosh, I just wish I would have known some of this stuff sooner. Because when I started finding it out for myself, it was a no-brainer. I was like, I would literally be dumb to not believe. In fact, that's what we have jotted down to title our episode is "You're not a fool to believe in God."
Right.
Because you're not. Because it is absolutely overwhelmingly true and backed up with so much facts, so many things that you can literally look at. All around you, which creation is, for me, the most evidence for Christ, or for God and who He is and His nature, which will come down the series line here for sure. But it's just there's so much.
Well, I mean, if
so much.
If you Google and like I said, I go down these rabbit holes all the time. Noah's Ark, Mount Ararat.
Yeah.
You see Google Earth an outline of what looks like an ark on a mountain.
Yeah.
That literally lines up with the Bible where the ark came to rest. But we can't go there and visit it because the country has
they don't want you can do it.
And I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, you know what we need to do? We need to go over there and just confirm it because that'll put a lot of stuff to rest.
All right, absolutely. And then there's a couple of cool documentaries, I don't remember the name of them, where they went down and they drilled the holes down into the mountain there. They were permitted to do so, pulled out stuff, and it was the wood that the ark was built out of was down deep in the core. And when they carbon dated it and stuff, it added up. It's really wild to see how more and more that they were like, no, we'll do this and it'll disprove it. And then they do it and like, oh man, it totally proves it.
I mean, like you said earlier, it's based on faith for us.
Right.
But I am a fanboy of tangible evidence. I love that stuff. Museums, and see, like if I ever get to go back to Washington, D.C., and actually see, I don't care if it's the corner of the Dead Sea Scroll, I'm going to be like, dude, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's the coolest thing ever.
That is the coolest thing I've seen ever in my life.
It is. I highly recommend if you ever get the opportunity. I know a lot of our listeners in the Appalachian region, so it's not too bad of a drive for you guys, but DC had in that Bible museum, it's unreal. You're going to get museum fatigue really fast because there's so much to look at. And again, as much as I love this stuff, there's only so many ancient Bibles I can look at. But I'm like, all right, we're good. Like we're solid. I got it. I get it. There's tons of evidence for it. But keeping on track with kind of what we're talking about, one of another really important point that I wanted to make was that what were the earliest Christians saying? Right. And we do have evidence of that. If you look into 1 Corinthians, it is chapter 15, verses 3 through 8. It lays out this idea, I guess it was a radical idea too, of what happened. It's literally like the synopsis of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and like what he did before ascending. So it says, "For I pass on to you as most important what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to over 500 brothers and sisters at one time. Most of them are still alive, but some have fallen asleep," which indicates that this is an early manuscript, right? Some of which are still alive when this letter was being, which is just should give you chills. And it says, "But some have fallen asleep. Then he appears to James, then to all the disciples. Last of all, as to one born at the wrong time, he also appeared to me." So the writer of Corinthians, right? So, which is insane because we're just going on and on giving more and more evidence.
Yeah.
Now looking into the biblical scriptures of who Jesus was, what happened to him, and that he appeared to over 500 people at once. I mean, 500 people, that's like a concert, It is just insanely cool to think about how these people saw him. Like, try to put yourself in that mindset for just a second, right? That this man that you saw was brutally murdered. I mean, like flesh ripped off to where you could see his open wounds on his back all the way down to his spine. It's brutally crucified, mocked, and then taken to the grave and was there. And you're like, all right, well, that was cool. Now what? And then 3 days later, he rises. And then shortly thereafter, he appears. And there's 500 people there. And they're all just kind of like, yeah. And then like, oh my gosh.
Well,
like,
I mean,
what would you do? What do you do in that mindset if you're like, oh my goodness?
I mean, going back to tangible things, the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, that's a real. I love that. That's such a cool topic.
I mean, if you look at like the X-ray that they did on it, it literally shows an outline, like, and literally described wounds of Jesus in the Bible are on the shroud,
right?
And the shroud itself was carbon dated as well, right to the almost the exact day, and they even went down to certain pollens that were on the shroud that are only in that area during that time.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. There's so many cool documentaries about that. I used to really like, if you go into the History Channel around Easter time, man, it goes on a deep dive of Jesus and all of historical stuff for him. So that's a really cool time to look at some of this stuff.
Well, what's funny though, I mean, to bring it kind of silly a little bit, 500 people saw Jesus, right?
Right.
Okay. And they know they saw Jesus. I can't even think of a documented time where 500 people saw Elvis. at you know how there's supposed to be Elvis sightings, and that's modern day,
right?
Like I'm like,
no, I'm tracking with you, and it's really cool because the people that were the closest to him that knew that this was going to cost them literally everything they owned, their families, it was going to cost them eventually their lives.
Yeah.
And especially, you know, how much the disciples went out and taught and preached into the world like they were commanded to do. You know, they claimed to have seen Jesus. The resurrection was also, this idea was preached first in and around Jerusalem, where it could have easily been challenged and be like, no, that dude's dead. He's in the, you know, over here. Or I know you've totally hit him, like they would have. But no, 500 people saw him there. And that's where it was documented. And that's where, you know, it could have easily been refuted, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, and the tomb was completely empty. Again, otherwise, Christianity would have been ended immediately. All they had to do was bring the body, or a refutable story, or say, you know, grave robber stole him or something, to be able to prove it that way. That's all they had to do. That's all they had to do, and then Christianity would have never taken off.
Yeah.
It would have been the end of it. It would have been Jesus was a good teacher, and that would have been it. But it's absolutely insane with all the evidence. Again, we're kind of side railing off of the historical stuff, but it's hard not to talk about Jesus and who he was and what he did, and not be able to get down that. But it's so important that we recognize that the resurrection is not a side note of who Jesus is. It is the basis. It is the heartbeat of Christianity. Without that, nothing else mattered.
Which is why growing up, you said, like, we look back at our youth, and you said, like, you know, apologetics and stuff, that's one thing that you were never really taught. And the resurrection is not a side note. And that's why growing up, I always thought Christmas was the main holiday. And no, I mean, that's just when he was born.
Yeah.
Easter is where it's at. And it's not just Easter anymore. I mean, it's leading up through Passion Week. It's leading up through all this entire week leading up to this. And the older I get, the more I'm like, I feel this weight on me the whole week, you know? So I think that's, you know, not just a change in my heart, but I think it's also, you know, the more and more you dig into this, you know, you're like, man, that's just kind of crazy that, you know, how important this moment was right here. And this is just the resurrection.
Right.
You know, the main cornerstone of our faith. But there's so much more to it. You know, it's like spider webs off of it. Exactly.
And again, if you don't have that as the basis, right, and the evidence for that goes in, to me, that doesn't separate. Yes, that proves that Jesus is God, but you can't separate the historical figure and then the documentedness of how many people he appeared to later.
Right.
Like those two things go hand in hand. It wasn't just some dude in a wig that pretended to be. I mean, these people, you got to remember the time of where this isn't just something that they could have easily done and faked and put together, and they sure wouldn't have been beaten and mocked and brutally murdered in ways even worse than some of them than a crucifixion, depending on the way you look at it. They would not have died for a lie.
1,000%.
Nothing to gain from it.
Especially going back to the Martyrs book. Why would I lie and risk that excruciating, painful death for a lie?
Yeah,
like
I mean,
you said, that would make zero sense.
Which is, to me, it proves who Jesus was all the more, right? All of these people, literally for centuries and centuries now, have died, and died horrible, brutal deaths for something that they know 100% fact to be true.
Right.
If you have any ounce of doubt that something might not be true, you're not going to die in the way that some of these people have died, for sure. Because, I mean, a bullet would be merciful.
Right.
You know, a beheading is merciful to some of these things that we read about in the book. I don't want to get too super graphic. We're going to get like a explicit thing on our podcast, but we have no idea what persecution is. We have no idea.
A lot of people, a couple like analogies that Frank Turek gives that just puts it like in perspective for me is a lot of people get mad at Jesus, mad at God, and you know, at certain things, or they'll get mad at, let's just say, the church. They'll get mad at their church. This church hurt. So they blame God. So when you walk into Guitar Center and there's someone playing Sweet Child of Mine very horribly, do you blame Slash? Or do you blame the person playing? They're no one perfect. So a lot of people, I think they turn a blind eye to who Jesus really was because they're hurt, or they blame him for that.
Right.
And some people say, I mean, we'll get into more details with creation, but like, let's just use an iPhone for instance. I've never met Steve Jobs, but I hold an iPhone. I know he created the iPhone. I have it. I could see it, and I know he existed. You know, there's proof there. In order to have, basically what I was listening to today with Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, he has a movie out called The Story of Everything. It's basically about creation. Is in order for all this fine tuning of all this stuff, you need a fine tuner. Right. You know, there's someone behind the thing turning it. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
You know, and I look at the story of Jesus and dive deeper. I'm like, man, it is literally like a poem, and it's like everything is perfect. I mean, it's not always pretty. I mean, we're going through, all sorts of ugly things, and all that stuff. But I mean, look at David's life. I mean, like, yeah, he was a hero. All of a sudden you're like, man, this guy's a scumbag. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh. So, then you look at his lineage, and it's all perfect. Like, it all lines up, and it's like, man, I love this stuff.
Oh, it is so cool. Just the way that the scriptures unfolded and all of the prophecy and stuff that Jesus fulfilled, and how many times you look back in the Old Testament and how many Christophanies or where he, presented himself throughout scriptures, then there's just so much that you can't hardly fit into an hour. Definitely can't fit it in an hour podcast episode, but I hope that this episode has helped at least check box number 1, which to me is the easiest box to check, because I'm just being honest that if you do not agree with the point that we're trying to make, that Jesus was at least a real man and the most influential man in history, you're barking up the wrong tree. Like, you're just at this point, you need to educate yourself more,
right?
Because the evidence is 100% overwhelming. Again, if Jesus did not exist, then neither did George Washington, neither did like all of these other people. You're like, oh, you don't even think twice about it. I promise you that when you dive into this and look for truth, that you'll find that Jesus, at the very least, was a historical figure, and he lived. He wasn't just that, but he was, at the very minimum, a historical person who made radical claims. He lived, he died, and there is lots and lots of other evidence that he rose. And if that's the last part there, the rose part, that we just kind of got to the surface of, if that is true, that demands a response. And, that kind of brings back to our last episode about worship, right? Like, if that part is real, if that believes, then the only thing that you can do is dedicate your entire life to understanding this. Right. To understanding the truth, What I would encourage our listeners to do is, we've named a lot of different things. I hope, again, if you're not driving, or even if you are, go back later and write it down. Some of these scholars that we've listed off, some historians, some great biblical authors, some people, apologetists, documentaries and things that we've mentioned. I highly encourage you to start looking at some of this stuff for yourself. One thing that I want you to remember, that I wish somebody would have told me, is you're not a fool to believe in God. You're not a fool to believe in Christ. There's so much evidence for it that you don't have to feel like you're just blindly walking by this, which we do believe. Again, I want to make sure that's very, very clear for our listeners. We're not saying that faith is, not important, because it is the cornerstone of everything that we believe. But I want them to also see that they can come back with evidence, that there's so much there. Highly encourage you guys to do a deep dive for yourself, because you're going to find that God's going to show you some things throughout some of the stuff that we talked about, and you're like, all right, wow, that's step 1. So I hope that we've checked that box for you guys, or if not, you're going to at least look into it and check the obvious box to check for yourself.
Right. And like, just off the top of my head, in Case for Christ, Lee Strobel, it's like I said, it is a very intellectual read. So is I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but if you take it one chapter, don't read it like a book. Read it like you're not to sound sacrilegious, read it like the Bible. You're studying this,
Right?
Because and you're gonna hear some numbers, you're gonna hear some things, and you're just write it down, and you're gonna see. I mean, in case for Christ, you're gonna see a guy's heart change, and then you're like, oh my gosh, okay, because and a lot of this stuff comes from, a lot of hurt. People don't want to believe in Jesus because they're hurt or something. And like I said, just because you didn't see George Washington doesn't mean he didn't exist. I've never met, certain people,
Right.
but they existed. Jesus was a man.
Yeah.
And it is, like you said, the most documented historical person of all time.
Right. And scrutinized.
Oh yeah, which is funny because I was thinking when you were talking earlier, like every year they put Time Man of the Year. And I think one year they put it was like Osama bin Laden or something like that. I'm like, whoa, hold on. like that. But then again, at the same time, I'm like, well, at the same time, he was talked about almost everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody knew who he was. You can say something about Trump or whoever. And I'm like, Jesus, even though he's, our savior, he is controversial to others. That would make him the most talked about person. So like in this time, during this time, he would be like,
He was radical. He was radical because of the claims that he was making. Like when you start looking about things that Jesus said, like when he was on trial, like I am and stuff like that, like they knew exactly what that meant. There was no, like today, they're like, Jesus never claimed to be God. 100% he did. It's what got him killed. It was the things that he was saying and the radical claims that he had that absolutely got him murdered. And there's just so much that you could dive into this.
I mean, could you imagine? I go back to that scene with Barabbas, and was it Herod or Pilate? I can't remember which one it was. Where he's washing his hands.
Yeah. I got it.
And just sitting here, and then him saying like, "I am." I'm like, and I was in that crowd watching this. I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this guy is nuts!" But at the same time, I'm like, who would falsely do that, knowing their impending doom?
Right.
I'm like, because what happens.
But here, the thing that takes it even further is you might fool yourself, right, into believing something that is a lie.
Yeah.
Which, some people will say is that the problem is that the lie that even if Jesus was a great teacher and stuff and he believed that he was the Son of God and all of these things, he could have just been a crazy guy who said that, right? The problem that people cannot get past is what we talked about earlier, how all of these people that were very close to Jesus died and had to die, some of them, again, even more brutal deaths than what Jesus died, for something that they could have easily just been like, nah, man, like we totally took the body. Like it is, and it's not true that when you try to claim that Jesus wasn't that. But
what's funny is they did right after they denied him, but right when he was resurrected, it was like light bulb.
Yeah, even he wanted to. Thomas wanted to see the scars and things. So even they were like, "Real? Are you sure?" I can't imagine how I would have felt if like my leader, my teacher, my Lord, and they again most of them minus one accepted him as Lord, and then he was brutally murdered in that way. I don't know what I would have thought either if this guy showed up and was like, "I'm Jesus." I'm like, "Well, you look like him, but
yeah."
I just saw what happened to you a few days ago, and but
you have an Appalachian accent. Are you sure?
That's funny.
My name is Cletus.
But man, I really one of the things, just because it was the thing that helped me the most, I do want to mention again the "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist" presentation. He does have a podcast and stuff, but he gets off on. To me, it's not the most friendly for new listeners. If that makes sense, because he can get.
It's heavy. It's very heavy.
It is heavy, and if you haven't looked into this stuff, you're not going to recognize a lot of stuff that he talks about. However, he has the same presentation that literally changed my life. It's available completely for free on YouTube. Mm-hmm. You can watch it from start to finish. You can see all of his slides. You can see the question and answer.
I think it's only like an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not very long. It depends on how long the question and answer session goes. Sometimes they're an hour and a half or 2 hours. I'm telling you, it's totally worth it.
Yeah.
And there's so many different universities you can watch it from. He goes around a lot of college campuses. Highly encourage our listeners to look at that. I'm telling you, he's going to present something to you that's mind-blowing, at least to us, for me. And I was somebody that called myself a Christian in my entire life, but I guess I again, you can go back to my testimony episode and listen to it. But it
You're just trying to get your numbers up. I get it. I get it. Okay, whatever.
Can't help it, man.
Vietnam, don't listen to that one. Listen to episode 1.
But I want to pray for our listeners. I think that when you do start diving into these things, man, the windows that open for me, that God was shedding some light on, it was a lot to realize how much I missed out on and what I could have been looking at. So, dear Heavenly Father, we just come before you this evening, God. We just thank you, God. We thank you for the gift of faith, God. We thank you for the evidence that you have given us, God. The evidence of creation and God, the evidence for Jesus and who he was, even as a historical man, God, and being the most influential human in history. God, we tend to forget things that he was fully man and fully God, and how he stepped down here on this earth to experience the things that we experience and live a perfect life. God, we just thank you so much for that gift. Lord, as our listeners start to take this dive for themselves, Lord, I just ask that you give them patience, God. You give them endurance to be able to dig through these types of things. It can be heavy, but Lord, I ask that you make it not heavy. You say that that your burden is light, God. That your yoke is easy and your burden is light. Lord, we just ask that you carry in that promise, Lord, when these the listeners are going down on these deep dives, Lord. We just ask that you open up the windows of heaven, God, to give them knowledge. To give them peace about the situation, God, as they start their journeys and looking for truth. We praise you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Also, if you guys do go down a deep dive, I do highly suggest everything written by man, always counter-reference it back to the Bible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Good disclaimer.
Just because there is a lot of stuff out there that you may read that could be false. And I don't know what you may read. You know, there could be something in Case for Christ that
check
was false.
Us. Absolutely. Go back and look at it.
Yeah, don't hold us to. I mean,
don't let me. I'm just telling you stuff I've learned.
Man, I work in grocery stores all day, so I this is not my full-time job. But
fortunately, I do teach.
Every day. Hold Cody to a higher. But you know, definitely discern everything you're reading. You know, cross-reference that back to the Bible, and then discern back to that. You know, because there's a lot of even stuff that you'll buy in a Christian bookstore could be false. There are Christian authors who are heretics now, whose books are still being sold there.
Yeah.
So just be very discerning, but at the same time,
and pray. I mean, God will show you. God will show you.
Cross-reference it back to the Bible and study. Just study. The Bible is not meant to be read like a book, but to study and live out every day.
Absolutely. All right, buddy.
All right,
sounds
dude.
good. Hey, listen, if you guys have any other resources that you'd like to share with listeners, reach out to the podcast at the Appalachian Disciples at gmail.com or find us on social media. Send us a Facebook message and let us know if there is something else that we should mention that might help our listeners. So, love you guys.
We'etnam, send us an email. Say hi.
Yes,
we love to,
absolutely.
We love to connect with everybody.
You're in second place now. Say hello. Peace out, guys.
Right, bye, guys.
Somewhere along the line, we've lost the meaning of discipleship.